Midnight Season 2 is officially here, and Affliction Warlock, as always, has gotten a bunch of changes. So it was perfect time for me to make a full updated guide for Affliction Warlock to get you started in Season 2. Let's jump right into it. Let's talk about it. Midnight Season 2 is actually looking super solid for Affliction Warlock, and I think personally the playstyle changes that we're getting in Season 2 compared to Season 1's playstyle are much more enjoyable to me, and I've been having a great time with them on the PTR. We definitely picked up some new talents and a few other little things, but overall I think the playstyle is just a little bit more engaging and a lot more fun in my personal opinion. I do want to say though, everything in this guide is all my own personal opinion and everything that I just found testing on the PTR, talking with Baby Brain Warlock and other people around the community, and obviously things can change. So if you want to stay up to date with everything, be sure to join my Discord, subscribe, all that stuff. I make Affliction content. That is my full-time thing. So without waiting any longer, let's jump into it. This guide, I'm going to be covering the Midnight Season 2 changes, stats, gear, Soul Harvester overview, talents, single target rotation, AoE rotation, Hellcaller overview, talents, single target rotation, AoE rotation, and then lastly I'm going to cover my UI and add-ons I like to use for Mythic Plus and Raid, and then we'll wrap the whole thing up. As always, everything has got to be broken into chapters. Feel free to jump around with whatever you need. Let's jump right into it. Midnight Season 2 has actually brought a few new changes for Affliction Warlock, including 2 new talents. The first one replaces where Nocturnal Yield was, and it's called Impetus Wrath. So Shadow Bolt and Malevolent Grass damage increased by 10% or 20% if the target is affected by Haunt. And then Dark Harvest is increased by 10% or 20% of the target is affected by Haunt. Essentially, this is just giving us more value on your priority target from either Shadow Bolt or Malevolent Grasp, and then obviously some more extra healing and damage from Dark Harvest. Essentially, the big thing this is replacing Nocturnal Yield. And if you knew, Nocturnal Yield was the talent that we had before that allowed you to cast Seed instantly via Nightfall procs. So that is now baked into Sharpness ability. So instead of proccing it from Nightfalls, you're now proccing it from using your Shadow Bolts or Drain Souls on Nightfalls, and then you have a chance to proc Sharpness ability, which gives you either a free UA or a free Seed of Corruption. So this changes our gameplay loop a decent amount in my opinion. So instead of just spamming seeds all the time because you're getting so many Nightfall procs, especially a Soul Harvester, you're proccing a lot of those free seeds by weaving in Shadow Bolts or Drain Souls. And in my opinion, I prefer weaving in Shadow Bolts. This is kind of how we used to play back in the War Within, if you ever played it the way I like to play back then. So you basically are keeping your priority target and then you're just weaving in Shadow Bolts onto that target. The other new talent that we have is Hedonic Gorging, which increases Drain Life damage by 10%, and Siphon Life now increases the damage of Corruption by an additional 10%. So essentially what this talent is doing is, instead of giving us priority damage via just Seed because it's replacing Patient Zero, we're now getting an extra reward for playing around Siphon Life. So it makes Corruption deal 40% increased damage when you take this talent, and then Dark Harvest channels 10% faster again and deals 15% increased damage. So the other one is just increased Dark Harvest damage and not channel speed, and then this one is increased the channel speed, right? So more leaning into Dark Harvest damage, which these are both things, if you watched my talent feedback video, these are almost exactly things that I suggested, but a little bit different. So essentially what I like about these is kind of rewarding playing around your dots a little bit more, especially with the whole Siphon Life thing, because now, at least in Mythic Plus, I think it's significantly more impactful to run Siphon Life, especially if you're taking this talent. We don't really get to take this talent in like pure single target, so there wouldn't really be a whole lot of value out of this because we have to go all the way over here. But essentially, I want to just say these 2 new talents I think are super fun to play around, and the change to Nocturnal Yield being more Sharpness stability, and now you just spend your Nightfall procs on Drains or Shadow Bolts, I think is significantly more fun for the playstyle. There was another change, which Haunt now increases the damage that your target takes by 20%, up from 16%. That came very recently to try and help our single target damage. Our single target damage is still a little lacking at the time of me making this video, but it's definitely a little bit better than it was, and I definitely think it's something they're probably going to continue to work on, especially even our pure single target build. We're definitely still a little lacking, but our whole kit as a whole has gotten some pretty significant upgrades. Our talent tree pathing in general, in my opinion, isn't as great as it could be, and it's definitely still suffering from the whole AoE side versus single target side, but overall, I think the new talents are super cool and definitely help us more in Mythic Plus than they do in Raid, because you can't really take a lot of these in Raid. You do take this talent in Raid, in our Raid build right now, especially if you're playing Soul Harvester, because you already go down this whole side of the tree. But you never get to take this guy really unless it's like a multi-cleave fight where you're taking the seed talents anyways. But overall, I think those new talent changes are super cool. Another major thing for Season 2 is our tier set. So our new tier set bonus is extremely powerful and super fun, and I think that overall we got one of the best ones that we've ever had. So our 2-set bonus is Corruption damage increased by 25% and Agony damage increased by 15%, and then our 4-piece is really where the fun starts. So Unstable Affliction increases your damage dealt by your spells spells and abilities by 2% up to 6%, and then Seed of Corruption applies Unstable Affliction at 20% effectiveness to your target. This tier set has some really fun interactions with Soul Harvester, specifically Demonic Fervor, where you're essentially getting a lot more value out of Demon Soul because you always have Unstable Affliction on your prio target, and then obviously all your Haunt interactions. But this tier set is super fun. So essentially, if you have 3 UAs out, which in AoE you are almost always going to have 3 UAs out, you're doing 6% increased damage across the board. And then in single target, again, if you have 3 UAs out, you do up to 6% increased damage. You're usually maintaining at least 1, sometimes 2, so you're hovering in between 2 and 4% increased damage at all times. But essentially, the 2-piece bonus is whatever, but that 4-piece bonus, that is extremely impactful and super fun to play around. The other thing I want to talk about is specifically for Hellcaller. So Hellcaller actually had a pretty substantial change, and it has to do with Blackened Soul. So the way the Hellcaller functioned before, when you spend shards on either Seed or UA, you got a bunch of Wither Stacks, and then those Wither Stacks would collapse via Blackened Soul and do a bunch of damage, and then had other interactions throughout the whole talent tree, including giving you shard instabilities. But in Midnight Season 2, they made a change to Blackened Soul to give Hellcaller a better tool for focusing damage into a priority target, increasing the overall flexibility of the hero talent tree, rather than to have it excel in situations where multiple targets are present. However, they're keeping the functionality and malevolence the same, so it remains a cool and impactful tool in Hellcaller's toolkit. So, essentially, when you pop malevolence, all of your withers erupt and get a bunch of stacks, but other than that, whenever you're spending shards, you're only getting Blackened Soul stacks on your main target. If you spend seeds in Malevolence, it does not increase your Wither stacks. So if the target is affected by Wither, your Unstable Affliction increases stack count by 1. And each time Wither gains a stack, it has a chance to collapse, gaining a stack every 1 second to deal Shadow Flame damage to its host until 1 stack remains. And then they also increase Blackened Soul damage by 45%. And then Mark of Parathorn, I have no idea how to say that correctly, that was also adjusted to increase Wither damage to deal 215% damage instead of the usual 200%, and then damaging critical strikes dealt by Blackened Soul deal 225 damage to the usual 200, and then they increase the base damage of Wither by 25%. I will say though, no matter what, all of these changes that they're trying to make seem to be trying to point us in the direction where Hellcaller should be our single target option instead of our AoE option, which is kind of interesting, like flipping our hero talents around. Personally, right now, Hellcaller is still performing significantly lower than Soul Harvester. It's like 10 to 20k DPS, depending on situation, and it still just feels kind of clunky to play because it doesn't have a lot of shard generation in general. I think part of the problem is that without the extra shard generation and the extra Nightfall generation, you are really kind of just suffering in these like Malevolence windows, and ideally what would happen is this talent in particular would be a little bit more impactful so that when you do have resources, they're stronger instead of just having a ton of resources like Soul Harvester. As of right now, Hellcaller is definitely still underperforming, but the changes to Hellcaller are definitely interesting, so I want to include them in here. Before we jump into the stats and gear section, I did want to quickly put this in the Season 2 changes. There was a major change to the way the gearing works next season, including bonus rolls and a few other things. You're going to be getting bonus rolls a lot earlier in the season if you played Midnight Season 1 at all. But the other major change that I think is really important is the fact that you can now retain stats on an item when you catalyze it, including retaining cantrip parts of those items. So specifically, there's going to be one item basically per armor type that has a specialty effect on it. So for us, it's a hat that has a mastery proc on it. You can actually turn this hat into tier set and it will keep the mastery cantrip and it will keep the stats that are on there. So the one that's on PTR has avoidance on it, but it just has flat mastery on it and then has a cantrip effect, and then it would also be part of the tier set. So that's something that I think you should definitely be keeping in mind. There are going to be pieces of our gear that you are going to want to catalyze and pieces of our gear that you don't want to catalyze, and pieces from the raid that you'll want just like the raw token item version. But essentially, I want to quickly talk about the fact that catalyzing it in the actual thing now retains the actual stats and the cantrip effect. So you won't just be catalyzing any item that you get, you're actually going to want to think about the stats a little bit. In Midnight Season 2, our stats are changing yet again. Essentially, we do still want as much haste as we can possibly get our hands on, up until 30%, like I've always said. But this season, I would definitely say we are extremely haste hungry. You could potentially even go over 30%, but I think a nice comfy area is going to be 30% haste. And then you're going to want crit, and then mastery, and then burst. Before we said mastery and crit were equal to each other, I would definitely say this season, as of me ranking this video, that crit is more valuable than mastery, and I think our current sims have us sitting around 1300 haste, 1300 crit, and then 400 mastery or something like that is about where you're going. You're going to want to run the haste flask to also help you with that, especially if you're in your full BIS setup, which I'll talk about in a little bit in the gearing section. But essentially, you're going to want to stack as much haste as you can up to 30%, and then as much crit as you can to help our single target. The best way to look at it is mastery is going to be better for AoE damage, and crit is going to be better for single target damage. So if you're really trying to juice up your single target damage, you're definitely going to want to lean more towards crit. But with all that said, from my personal testing, I still found crit to be more impactful across like an entire key. So I usually try to gear more towards crit, especially if you're like me and you're playing Affliction in both Raid and Mythic Plus, and you might be interested in playing Destro. All of our stats are going to kind of overlap a little bit, but crit, haste first, then crit. If you have a ton of crit and no haste, obviously run Haste Flask. If you have a ton of haste and no crit, run the Crit Flask. But that essentially covers that. Get as much haste you can up to 30%, and then crit mastery, and you'll be happy. Midnight Season 2 gearing is actually very interesting. So I mentioned it briefly in the changes section, but a major component of Midnight Season 2 gearing is the fact that when you catalyze an item, it will retain the stats on that item. So for instance, our default tier shoulders do not have crit haste on them. I believe they have haste and versatility on them, which we don't really want, right? So these shoulders that I'm wearing are the ones that come from Temple. And if we were to look those up, you'll just see that they're just crit haste, right? So those kind of items are going to be like, there's actually kind of like bissless items this tier to try and get our stats exactly where we want them. So definitely something that you want to be aware of. There's about 6 items from the raid that are basically bis. So there's a special cantrip hat that has just mastery on it and then has a mastery proc on it. It drops a higher item level, and then there on Mythic obviously, and then there is a necklace off of the last boss as well that has a bunch of crit on it, and then also has a crit proc on it. Also, it reduces our stats as well, but not really an issue. Double socket also has a crit proc. These 2 items are turbo bis, right? The shoulders, like I mentioned, from Temple, and then that's obviously not a raid item. There is a cloak from the raid. Essentially, the last 2 bosses of the raid drop higher item level loot on Mythic, right? So you'll see they're 344 versus the other guys are dropping 324 unless you max it out, and then it's 334. So the last 2 items, or the last 2 bosses, are going to have basically all bis items from us, right? This cloak is going to be bis for us. These gloves are going to be best for us. You're going to catalyze these boots are going to be best for us. Not so much this trinket. The trinket's not very good. Obviously, the hat I just talked about, the necklace with the crit proc, and then this trinket's not very good. And then there is a hyper good weapon that is our bis weapon. That is a very rare drop. You're going to be chasing this thing probably with bonus rolls. So vaults next season, after like week 2, I believe, you'll have, you can choose either getting a socket or you can choose a bonus roll. More often than not, you're probably going to choose a bonus roll if you're doing any kind of raiding, because getting your hands on these items is extremely impactful. I think these items altogether are like 10-15% increase in damage. Obviously, higher item level is really good, but also just the effects on them, super good. So this item in particular, our turbo bis that we're looking for. Our trinkets that we're looking for, one of them is going to come from the 3rd boss. This bottomless bag, in my opinion, is like our absolute best trinket. There's one that comes from the new raid world boss that has like a mythic flex option, which is this Wavecaller system. That's probably our secondary best trinket that we can get our hands on. As I was editing this, there was a wave of trinket nerfs that came through, including a huge nerf to Gebo's bottomless bag. While this trinket is still probably very good for us, I no longer think it's our bis, and I think our best one is probably going to be the Wavecaller Sea Stone, but both are still pretty solid. Also, as the on-use trinkets go, the Vial is very, very good from the new dungeon, and the Freight Runner's Flask is also very good. There is also the Channeled Haste trinket, which is technically our best trinket for raid. However, it's a little awkward in Mythic Plus. But I did want to mention briefly, like, the last 2 bosses have like almost all of our important things. And another big thing to remember is next season, if you bonus roll in Heroic, you get Mythic gear out of that bonus roll, and if you do heroic bosses, you get mythic raid loot in your vault as well. So definitely want to be doing heroic next year for those items in particular if you're trying to go for like your absolute bis setup. And then for the rest of our gear, you're basically just looking for anything with like high haste and crit. For crafted gear next season, things are actually a little interesting right now. Double Arcana Weave is still very good. However, at the time of me making this, there was some new sims that came out that showed the new Hunter's Ritual Stone embellishment is actually better on our offhand. So I'm suggesting you craft offhand with Hunter's Ritual Stone with crit haste, and then try and bonus roll the weapon out of the raid so you save those 80 crests and get that mythic weapon, and then craft Arcana Weave on your braces with crit haste. As always sim your character and see what's best for you, but this is my current suggestion. There are 2 really good rings that come from the raid. The one that we're pretty much looking for is this one, the claw ring that has a bunch of crit on there, and then the other ring that we're looking for is the Band of the Demonic Warlord, which is the one that I believe comes from the new dungeon. There's a few items in the new dungeon that are really good from us. Altar of Fangs. So this ring is our absolute one of our best rings in my opinion right now. These gloves, until you get the actual like super turbo ones, are probably going to be our, you know, one of our best ones. I will make a full list of this once Keystone Loot gets updated, and so you'll be able to just import my Keystone Loot profile, and you'll see which, like, where all of our absolute BIS items come from. I did one of these last season. I'll have that all in my Discord. It's not updated yet, so I don't have a link for you guys, but I will have a link for that in my Discord. Obviously, all my things will stay up to date in my Discord, so be sure to check all there for that. The main thing I want to say though, obviously crit haste for all of our main stuff. Those trinkets are definitely kind of interchangeable. I prefer playing with the vial. I think it's more fun. Bottomless bag or sea stone, and then that turbo important weapon, the cantrip items, right? That basically covers most of our gear. There are some okay items that come from dungeons. Like I said, obviously trinkets and things like that. And there's a weapon that comes out of here that has a little effect on it. Not bad at all. But as of right now, of me making this video, choosing from your vault is going to be really interesting early on, because if you're doing any raiding, bonus rolls are probably going to be your better option. So you get those, so you can target those really powerful raid items early, unless something in your vault is like a really good mythic weapon from dungeons or something like that. For a quick gear recap, I love everything around 30% haste, then crit, then mastery. Pick up your bonus rolls from Vault every week if you're raiding, unless it's a mythic item from the last 2 bosses or a BIS mythic dungeon piece, but almost always pick bonus rolls to save the extra crest for the last 2 bosses. The main things you're looking for are the BIS weapon off the last boss, the hat and the necklace, and then the high eye level items off the second to last boss. For the trinkets, you're going to want to go with Vial or Stormbound Emblem with either Sea Stone or Bottomless Bag. And then for crafted, I suggest crafting offhand with Crit Haste and the Hunter's Ritual Stone, and then Arcana Weave on your bracers, or you could go with double Arcana Weave, go with bracers and belt. This video does not have a sponsor, but it is sponsored by me at BrewManiac.com. So if you do not know, I make all my own designs, and there is a full new drop available right now at BrewManiac.com in honor of Season 2 starting, including mouse mats and hoodies and t-shirts, all designs I made myself, and I'm super happy to share them with you. So if you want to find some new ways to support the channel, be sure to check that out. Midnight Season 2 has actually brought some really nice changes for Soul Harvester, and I think our 2 new talents that we talked about benefit Soul Harvester more than they do Hellcaller for a couple reasons. So essentially the main core of Soul Harvester is that you are going to be generating Succulent Soul Shards, which is just a random chance when you generate a Soul Shard from Agony, or every time you Dark Harvest, you're going to get 3 of them, or every time a target dies that you've dealt damage to, or that you kill, you also get a Succulent Soul Shard when running Feast of Souls. So that's kind of your main thing. Succulent Soul Shards basically do extra damage around a target. They're kind of like more passive, you don't really think about them, but you do want to be, you know, very active about when you're using them. So essentially your main gameplay loop is going to be generating Succulent Soul Shards and then spinning those on either UAs or Seed of Corruption, and then trying to make sure you don't overcap as much as you can, especially in single target when using Dark Harvest. In AoE, you are probably going to overcap almost every time, but a lot of times in single target, you want to make sure you don't overcap when you use Dark Harvest. The other thing is you're going to want to try and sync up Dark Harvest with Dark Lair as much as you can. It is a little awkward sometimes because it's a 45-second, 1 minute versus a 2 minute. Essentially, my rule of thumb is if Dark Lair has 20 seconds on it, hold the Dark Harvest. If Dark Lair has 30 or 40 seconds on it, just send the Dark Harvest and then delay the Dark Lair a little bit, unless you really have very specific windows that you're trying to hit, but that usually works pretty well for that. The other thing I mentioned was Impetus Wrath and Hedonic Gorging, our 2 new talents. I do think they benefit Soul Harvester a little bit more than Hellcaller, solely because of their interaction with Haunt and Shadow Bolt. So and obviously Dark Harvest, which is a core component of your kit. Essentially though, you're already rewarded for having Haunt on the target by getting a free Nightfall. Every time you use Haunt, you get a Nightfall proc, and then every time you spend a Nightfall proc on Shadow Bolt or Drain Soul, that is empowered by 50%. Before, you were just using Seed with all those Nightfall procs, right? So you weren't really getting any benefit from this talent unless it was a single target. Now, in AoE, you're weaving in Drains or Shadow Bolts. In my personal opinion, I think it's much more enjoyable to play around Shadow Bolt. It's another instant cast. It's so much easier to just like weave into our rotation. Not that Drain is bad. Drain actually is probably better in pure single target, especially with heavy execute. But in my current testing right now, I think that Shadow Bolt's way more enjoyable to play around. So getting more value out of that Shadow Bolt, hitting even harder if it hits at your Haunt target, and getting Haunt Nightfall procs, you can kind of see the synergy loop that's happening with Soul Harvester there. And then obviously the Dark Harvest component of that. Increased corruption damage and more Dark Harvest damage. You're already kind of getting increased corruption damage in your kit like corruption deals 25% damage faster, and you're getting all these other interactions with Nightfall procs and stuff like that. So I think that the new talents definitely favor Soul Harvester more than they do Hellcaller. And then obviously with Shard Instability being procced by, you know, spinning drains or Shadow Bolts, you're definitely getting more rewards for playing around the way that our kit flows. Soul Harvester just flows significantly better than Hellcaller. So that's kind of like the main idea. You're spinning your Nightfall procs on Drain or Shadow Bolts. You're getting more benefit out of those Drains or Shadow Bolts. You're proccing additional things whenever you use those Nightfall procs. You're getting Succulent Soul Shards randomly, or whenever you cast Dark Harvest, which is also going to give you 3 Soul Shards just in general. You'll spend those on either UAs or Seeds, and that's kind of your whole gameplay loop. There is one other thing that I do want to talk about with Soul Harvester, and it has to do with our tier set bonus. So essentially, our tier set bonus has a really interesting interaction with Soul Harvester specifically, and not Hellcaller. So the second half of it, which is, you know, Seed of Corruption applies Unstable Affliction at 20% effectiveness to your target, that has a very interesting interaction with specifically this talent. So Demoniac's Fervor has always been really impactful for Soul Harvester, but this season in particular means that this is active all the time. So your Demonic Soul deals 100% increased damage to your targets affected by your Unstable Affliction. So Unstable on the target doing damage is nice, but it engaging this talent is why Demonic Soul is basically doing the same damage as Seed of Corruption over entire key. So while Seed of Corruption damage is still really good, Demonic Soul getting so much value from that one talent is kind of the reason why Soul Harvester is even really competitive in AoE damage right now. It's definitely not bad for single target damage, but I did want to briefly touch on this talent in particular is a very interesting interaction. It's not really going to change the way you play or anything like that. You're still just going to be spamming Seeds on your prio target that has Haunt on it and stuff like that, and just stacking those UAs. But it is something to be aware of in 2 target situations. So if you have 2 targets that are close to each other and you're going to be seeding, I think a lot of times it's worth putting a UA on each one of them and then going into your Dark Harvest with your Succulent Soul Shards, because you're getting more value of this talent in particular, and you can see how much value Demonic Soul gets. So I think there's some times where if you're going into your Dark Harvest window, you could maybe throw a seed on one and then throw a seed on another one so you get that UA out there, and then go into your just normal seed spam. It's so much easier to set up this time instead of how it was in season 1, where you have to like throw a UA, and then Dark Harvest. But I just want to quickly mention that in this video because I do think that's a really, really specific interaction to why that's doing so much damage. For talents for Soul Harvester, I would definitely say there are essentially a couple different builds, but for Mythic Plus, there's basically one build with a floater point. So as far as the class talents go, I would say this is pretty default for most builds for Hellcaller or Soul Harvester, with a few exceptions. So you might change Blighted Weakness for Blighted Tongues depending on what your group needs. Blighted Tongues, I would say, is probably the better default this season. There is a lot of casters and is probably way more impactful. Blighted Weakness is usually only if your tank is like, you know, asking you for it. So always default to Blighted Tongues. I also usually play with Ichor, but Frequent Donor is really good. I just felt like a lot of times I was rotting out too much and it was tough to get value out of Dark Pack sometimes, so that's also a choice node. A lot of people like to take Fiendish Stride instead of Abyss Walker. I personally like to have Abyss Walker for just a little tiny extra % of DR, especially since I'm teleporting all the time, and there's a lot of things this season that you can teleport to remove. There's a debuff that goes out on you from the Hydra guys, and that essentially can be removed just by teleporting it. Similar to Nexus, where any type of slow or snare that's on you, you can just teleport it and it'll remove the debuff. So definitely like that. Default to Shadow Fury, you can run Howl if you want to. As far as the actual hero talents themselves go, I would say in Mythic Plus, you are always going to default to Feast of Souls. In Raid or pure single target environments, you're going to default to Shared Fate. But essentially, if there's ever a situation where targets can die around you, like an ad fight or anything like that, Feast of Souls is going to be better because you're going to get stuck on the Soul Shards. But definitely go for whichever one you want better. This used to be the default no matter what, but Feast of Souls, in my opinion, significantly better in Mythic Plus. As for the actual talents themselves, for Mythic Plus, I would say this is the default build. As always, all builds will be updated in my Discord, and on my profile loader, you can also just grab all of these, or in my Discord, you can import my entire Talent Loader EX profile and just import it, and it'll have it set up like this all for you, including every single boss. I will have one of these for both Aff and Destro. Probably not any for Demo because I don't have any plans on playing that, but I will have everything updated in my Discord as always, for free. But essentially for Mythic Plus, I have been preferring to run Shadow Bolt over Drain Soul. You can run Drain if you want, but like I mentioned in the other section, and I'll mention constantly, I have way more fun with Shadow Bolt, especially with Nightfall Shadow Bolts, because you just weave it in on your main target, and it's another option to do with movement, so you can proc a shard instability, and then just more instant cast. The floater point that I mentioned before is this Niskaran Methods point, and there's a few little spots it can go. So I did a lot of testing with Withering Bolt, and all of my current testing that I found, even with like weaving in more Nightfalls and more Shadow Bolts or Drains, it just didn't have as much impact on the course of the key. I would highly encourage you, though, if you want to try it. You would basically drop Cunning Cruelty and you would drop this point, and that's kind of the build that you would play. But I think right now, this floater point is either in Niskaran Methods or Grasp. Of all the things that I've tested, the biggest single target upgrade is going to be Malefic Grasp, but I personally don't enjoy playing around Malefic Grasp. Even in Raid, I don't think it's that fun. So I would encourage you to just default to Niskaran Methods. If you really want to try it, go with Grasp, but of all the things I've tested, that's basically the two that I think were the best. Malediction's actually not bad, especially with how much crit we're running, but Niskaran Methods, in my opinion, is just better. Over the course of a key, Corruption and Agony actually do like a lot of damage, so just adding 10% on top of that, not bad at all. For pure single target for Soul Harvester, this is essentially what that build is going to look like. I will have updated raid builds in my Discord as well. You will probably almost always run Drain Soul, especially if there is like really heavy, long execute phases. Like think like Mythic Laura P3, where you're just like in execute for like 4 minutes. Drain Soul is going to just go crazy there. However, in contrast to Mythic Laura P3, there's a lot of movement. So if there's heavy movement, run Shadow Bolt. You're going to get a lot more value out of that, unless you're super comfortable planting your feet and getting drain value. So again, choice node, just always default. A lot of movement, go Shadow Bolt. A lot of like execute value and not a lot of movement, go Drain Soul. And then for the rest of the talents, pretty default here. I would say if you can, I kind of like this talent more than Niskaran for a lot of raid situations. So this one might flip-flop depending on the raid fight, or the pure single target fight, whatever it is. I think there's a lot of cleave fights in the new raid, so I'll keep all these things updated when everything goes. It's going to go in there. The new talent for sure, because you're just getting more Shadow Bolt value and more Dark Harvest value, right? And then everything else is pretty standard, right? We were running Sudden Onset before, not really important. I mentioned Shared Fate again, pure single target, definitely all that stuff. So nothing too crazy there. But as far as Mega Plus build goes, that's the one that I've been enjoying the most with Shadow Bolt. All the imports for all those stuff will be in the description below, and obviously up to date in my Discord always. Soul Harvester's single target rotation hasn't changed a whole lot since season 1, but there are a few things I want to talk about. So for this, I'm going to do it in the Mythic Plus build, but the only major change would be if you're in like raid build, would basically be Cascading Calamity and Malefic Grasp. So the main thing about Calamity is that if you have a UA on the target, you're going to want to refresh that UA or cast another one on top of that to refresh this buff, right? You're basically going to be doing similar things like that in Mythic Plus anyways, but I do want to briefly mention, be aware of that buff. And then Grasp, you're basically going to want to try and maximize your Grasp windows by casting as many of them as you can in your Dark Glare window, while balancing how many UAs you have out there. I'll do a quick little raid demonstration at the end. There won't be like a full one, just like an opener kind of showing some of those things. But I did briefly want to talk about that before we got into the full single target. The other thing I want to talk about that'll also be after this first one will be like the raid single target opener, which involves this trinket in particular. So this one you will cast before you Dark Harvest, whereas the other one, like if you're just running a regular on use, like the vial or like the crit flask or whatever, you'll pop that after you Dark Harvest. In my opinion, anyways, that's kind of what I've been seeing, so that kind of makes sense. So if we're going into like the Mythic Plus one and we're not running that haste trinket, we're going to go into it. I'm going to set a focus target every time, and then I'm going to Haunt, Agony, Corruption. I'm going to dump 2 UAs here, and then I'm going to Dark Harvest. I got an extra one. And then I'm going to Potion Trinket Dark Glare, and then I'm just going to dump UAs. And I'm going to catch these Nightfalls. I'm going to, like before they fall, I'm going to cast one, catch that Corruption, cast this Nightfall, refresh this Agony, refresh this Haunt, catch this Nightfall, and then I'm just weaving in UAs in between that, right? Dumping those. You don't want to necessarily bottom out on shards, and then I'm filling with Corruption. You don't want to bottom out on shards because you want to try and maintain a UA at all times out there, right? And then I'm just flowing between that state. Refreshing this Agony, refreshing this Haunt. I got Shard Instability, I'll spin that guy. Refresh that Nightfall proc, get another UA out there. I like to usually just hover around one shard, and then I'm just watching my dots, and then I'm watching Dark Harvest. So as soon as Dark Harvest comes back up, I know I'm going to spin this, spin that Nightfall, spent enough shards here, Dark Harvest, refresh that Agony, spin these UAs so I'm not capped, get this Haunt, corruption, and then I'm just weaving those in over and over again. That's essentially the full single target rotation until Dark Glare comes back up. And then when Dark Glare is about 20 seconds away, if Dark Harvest is back up, then I'm gonna hold that Dark Harvest. If Dark Harvest is, or if Dark Glare is at like 40 seconds and Dark Harvest is back up, then I'm gonna send that Dark Harvest and delay this Dark Glare until I can get that Dark Harvest back. So there's like a really tight window where Dark Harvest is about 40 seconds, send it. Or sorry, if Dark Glare is about 40 seconds, send that Dark Harvest. If Dark Glare is 20 seconds, hold that Dark Harvest, right? If you're somewhere in between that window, you're just gonna have to get a feel for the fight or whatever, but that's usually my general rule of thumb on that. So basically maintain your dots. Don't waste any of your procs, especially your Nightfall procs, and then just weave those in. For the Soul Harvester raid single target opener, it does change a little bit, like I mentioned. I'm running Cascading Calamity and Grasp. But the major thing I want to talk about is if you're running this haste trinket, like I mentioned. So essentially we're going to do that before we Dark Harvest instead of after. So as we go into the pool, again, I'm still setting a focus target. I'm opening with Haunt into Agony Corruption. And then I'm immediately channeling this trinket. I'm going to dump 2 UAs here. I'm going to Dark Harvest. And then I'm going to cast Glare. Dump this UA so I'm not capped. Catch that Nightfall proc. Dump this Nightfall, or dump these UAs until I'm not capped. And then spin that Grasp. Refresh this Agony. Refresh this Haunt. Spin UA. Spin that Nightfall proc so I'm not capped. Spin this Nightfall proc. And then I'm just maintaining UAs on this guy for the most part and trying to weave in as many grasps as I can, right? If I got a proc here, I'm going to send it. But I'm trying to weave as many grasps as I can in here without maintaining, you know, with still maintaining our dots and stuff like that. So I got an extra one there. And then I want that Agony Fall. Try to catch that Haunt a little bit earlier than that. And then just weave this Shadow Bolt in. I'm running Drain here, right? So weave that Drain in. And then we're just maintaining 1 UA on our target at all time to maintain Cascading Calamity. So don't over burn out. I got Dark Harvest back up, so I'm going to send this guy. I'm going to get this UA back out there. Spin a couple of these guys. Boom. Send that Haunt back out there. Get back up to 3 stacks here. And then I'm just draining to fill. I'll send the Shard Instability. Drain to fill. Don't waste that Nightfall proc. Get that UA back out there. And then that's basically it, right? I'm doing the same thing like I was doing the other one for Mythic Plus. Just maintaining this buff. Maintaining some UAs out there. Don't bottom out on shards. Make sure that you always have a UA on your target at all times. And make sure you maintain your buffs, right? You can usually do it pretty easy with Shard Instabilities and, you know, maintain all that stuff. And then same role applies. So like this Dark Harvest is about to come back up, right? If I spend these UAs here. So I'm gonna, before this Dark Harvest comes up, I'm gonna refresh this Agony. I'm gonna refresh this Haunt right here. Spend these Shard Instabilities to get this Dark Harvest back. Immediately Dark Harvest, because our Dark was like 37. Then we're just dumping shards. We'll get this Harvest back up a little after this Glare comes back, but way more efficiently fit like a whole other Dark Harvest in there, right? And that's basically it. Soul Harvester Midnight Season 2's AoE rotation has definitely changed a little bit, and the main change is because of Nocturnal Yield being gone. So you no longer are getting instant cast seeds via Nightfall procs anymore, but you can still get them via Shard Instability. So Shard Instability just applies to either Unsealed Affliction or Seed of Corruption. So you are still getting free Nightfalls, you know, via every time you haunt, but you're gonna want to send those on either Drain Soul or Shadow Bolt. That's why I prefer Shadow Bolt, is because it's much easier to just weave into your AoE rotation and in single target to proc more seeds instant or proc more UAs. In AoE, you are always going to cast Seed of Corruption. You're going to cast Seed of Corruption if you can ever hit 2 targets with your seed. I did mention that briefly a little bit before, but essentially that's the main part of that. I will say though, you definitely want to never overcap on Nightfall procs. It's super important to weave those in, but it's important to never overcap on shards. So casting seed is more important, but you should be able to comfortably maintain agonies, weave in Nightfall procs, and cast as many seeds as you can. So as you're going into the pool and your tank is gathering, I'm always setting my focus target on a priority mob. So as our tank is gathering and going to the pool, I'm going to set my focus target on my priority mob. If you're using my nameplates, they're going to be the ones that are marked as green. They're usually like scary caster guys or whatever. But whichever one is your priority mob is fine. I just set my focus target there every time because that's where I'm going to build off of. And then as our tank is gathering, I'm putting agonies out there, right? In this situation, we're just going to put them out there. And then I'm going to send a haunt and then immediately send a seed into that to get everything dotted up. And then I'm going to Dark Harvest. And then Trinket Potion, Dark Glare, and then I'm just ripping seeds onto this guy. And you really ideally want to catch some of these agonies as much as you can. Send that Nightfall proc, catch this agony. Send a Nightfall proc, catch this agony. Don't let that Nightfall expire. Remember that you'll get a free one when you cast Haunt, so you can use that to refresh your Nightfall procs, catch this agony. And then I'm just dumping shards, weaving Nightfalls. Seed, weave a Nightfall. Seed, weave a Nightfall, refresh agonies. And then if you ever have to move is when you really want to catch agonies. If you can help delaying that as much as you can to when you have to move, that's when you're gonna want to do it. Or if you know that you kind of need to get prepared for like movement, that's when you should do like an agony, right? Just try and, if much as you can plant your feet and cast seed, the better. And then as soon as harvest is up, send it. If anything's over like 20% health, just send that harvest. And then we're just catching agonies, maintaining our haunt, make sure we're not overcapping on Nightfall procs. I got Nightfall proc instantly, and then we're just dumping as many seeds as we can in this window while maintaining enough agonies, right? Usually like 6 to 8 agonies like I usually suggest, and then just leaving in Nightfalls. That's basically it. The same logic applies that I was kind of talking about with Soul Harvester in single target, where like if you get to a moment where your Dark Glare is about to come back up and your Dark Harvest is up, you know, off cooldown, and things have like a ton of health in your big pull, in single target you're probably going to send that, you know, and sync those things up. In AoE, in Mythic Plus, you're going to need to be kind of aware of pulls, and you'll get used to that as you push more keys. More often than not, you want to be careful with Dark Glare. Sending Dark Harvest is completely fine. It's like a 45-second cooldown. It's all right. Sending Dark Glare, you want to be as, you know, comfortable with that as you can. But if things are like 20% health, probably not worth sending Dark Glare on those things, right? Definitely worth sending Dark Harvest. But I did want to quickly just kind of briefly throw it in there. And then I would say try and spend more seeds than refreshing agonies, but you definitely want to find a nice comfortable balance of that. You know, it's more impactful to spend seeds and then refresh, like throw another agony out there, than it is to like refresh a bunch of agonies. But I do think there's like a really comfy window you can find in that window. But I did want to just kind of briefly mention there is situations where you will send Dark Glare if things are kind of low, but 20-30% health is like that, around that area where you're probably not going to send it. But use your cooldowns on cooldown is definitely a very good metric, and then adjust things if you need to. Hellcaller Midnight Season 2 has actually gone through some substantial changes. The major one is around Blackened Soul. So the main functionality of how Hellcaller functions, if you've never played it before, is Corruption turns into Wither, and then every time you spin shards, you would then gain a bunch of Wither stacks, specifically Blackened Soul stacks, and then those would have a chance to collapse, which have other interactions with your tree, like giving you shard instabilities, which would allow you to have either free seeds or UAs. And then there's other things about Wither, but that's kind of the main gameplay loop, is that you would get Wither stacks and they would collapse every time you spent shards. And then when you were in Malevolence, you would pop Malevolence, which is your extra cooldown button, and then it gives you a bunch of haste, and it also gives you a bunch of stacks on all of your Wither targets. And then as you're spinning shards in those, it's actually doubling how many stacks are getting due to your other talents. And then you can proc Malevolence throughout there, and then the value of all of your abilities and stuff like that is doubled while you're in those effects, or it does a bunch of damage while you're in those effects. The main change, though, before, whenever you spent shards on either Seed of Corruption or Unstable Affliction, you would get Wither stacks, and then you would get double those stacks when you were inside of Malevolence. The main change now is that you only get Blackened Soul Wither stacks via spending it on Unstable Affliction, and you only get them on the main target that you're spending Unstable Affliction stacks or Unstable Afflictions on. So the number of stacks that you're going to have in like a Mythic Plus situation is going to be extremely low. You'll only have a bunch of stacks whenever you pop Malevolence, and then you're only going to get stacks on like your main target if you actually choose to spend Unstable Affliction on that target, which in AoE you never will. You don't get Blackened Soul stacks from our tier set bonus, which is giving you free UAs, but that whole interaction there is definitely extremely lackluster and does not feel rewarding at all anymore. I actually really love the way this gameplay loop felt, because you were essentially spending shards to make a dot more impactful, and you kind of were just always building up all these Wither stacks and kind of watching them collapse, and then getting a lot of value when they did collapse, and like I said, mentioned with shard instability and things like that. Now you really only get Wither stacks when you pop Malevolence, and you just can't really have that many stacks, and it doesn't really feel like the whole stacking component makes any sense anymore. So I would definitely love to see more interactions happen with Hellcaller, because right now it's not it. It doesn't have nearly as much shard generation. It plays like how old AF used to play. You only get shards via agonies, and you don't really get any Nightfall procs. You're supposed to be getting a decent amount whenever things happen, but for the most part, you don't get nearly as many Nightfall procs as Soul Harvester, and you don't get nearly as many shards as Soul Harvester, because you're not generating as many like when you do Dark Harvest or anything like that. So Hellcaller really needs some help in just the resources department, or this talent in particular should be the reward for having less resources, but they do significantly more damage. As of right now, that is not the case. Briefly, that kind of covers what's going on with Hellcaller and how Hellcaller functions as a kit. I really used to love the playstyle of this. It feels really fun with Malevolence and getting a bunch of haste. As of right now, definitely pretty clunky, but I would highly encourage you to at least try it and understand how it plays, and if you like it, that's all good. It does have some cool stuff with Curse of the Satyr, which is basically Curse of Tongues and Curse of Weakness in one curse. Super fun to play around, especially with Foul Mouth, but for the most part, Hellcaller feels a little clunky to play around right now. As for the talents for Hellcaller, for Mythic Plus, they're almost identical to Soul Harvester. The class talents are identical to Soul Harvester. Again, you would really only swap Blight of Weakness over Blight of Tongues if you are asked for by your tank, in my opinion, or if you're like really familiar with the dungeon, but I would say just default to Blight of Tongues in every situation right now. Ichor of the Devils is something that I prefer to run, but Frequent Donor is also really good. I just found that I was rotting out so much that sometimes it just felt more beneficial to be able to Dark Pact without having to worry about how much health I'm losing and getting the same amount, but not as short of a cooldown. As far as the other talents go, a lot of people run Fiendish Stride over Abyss Walker. I prefer to run Abyss Walker for the extra 4% DR. I just think it's more fun to play around, especially with how much you're teleporting, or you should be teleporting. There's a lot of things that you can clear off of yourself, like a lot of debuffs that you can just clear by just teleporting, because it can remove roots and snares. So several debuffs just count as a root or a snare, and then when you teleport, you get to remove that, and you get a little extra damage reduction. In my opinion, it's just nice to have. This season, they fixed Fel Synergy, so I'm dropping Oppressive Darkness to pick up Fel Synergy they fixed Soul Leech, so Soul Leech is just getting a lot more value. As far as the hero talents themselves go, I would say there's not a whole lot of choice here. Curse of Satyr, in my opinion, default, super amazing. Aura is really fun, except that it's tied to Unending Resolve, so it's really hard to get a lot of value out of that, whereas Curse of Satyr is value the whole time. These two, I go back and forth all the time. More often than not in Mythic Plus, because we're running Siphon Life, I think it's better to just go with Bleak Heart tactics instead of rituals. Just kind of makes things a little bit awkward. But I think every time I've tested these, they're almost identical to each other. You can do some more testing, but I think Bleak Heart tactics is the better choice here. And then between these two, it's just resilience always, all the time. And then for the actual talents themselves, again, it's the exact same build I'm running on Soul Harvester. The only exception is you could potentially drop Cold a Week for a different talent like Sacrolash, but I personally think that Cold a Week is better. You are getting more wither damage here, but I just don't think it's better than just having more frequent Dark Harvest. And then, in my opinion, Shadow Bolt feels way better on Hellcaller. You're already kind of dealing with enough things that you kind of just want to be doing Shadow Bolts instead of Drains, and you don't really have a whole lot of interactions with Nightfall throughout your whole tree with Hellcaller like you do with Soul Harvester. So just weaving in Shadow Bolts, in my opinion, just feels better. But Drain is super solid too, especially helping with more, execute damage. Don't be afraid to pick up Drain if you want to try that, or if you prefer Drain. The floater point is still Niskaran and Methods. I think it's less floatery for Hellcaller because of all your interactions with Agony. You have like 30% Agony damage here. Obviously, it's giving you more Wither damage, you know what I mean? So definitely don't think it's as floaty as Soul Harvester is, but for the most part, that's about that. And then for single target builds, which it might be a little weird for us to ever run Hellcaller and pure single target, but that is what they kind of want Hellcaller to be. But as of me making this right now, it is definitely the lesser of the two performing. Again, I will have up-to-date builds for everything in my Discord for Soul Harvester and Hellcaller. And then if you grab my profile loader, or if you grab my Talent Loader EX string that's in the Discord, you can just import all of my builds that I'll have, including builds for every single boss. And I'll keep those up to date as much as I can. So as of right now, the single target build for Hellcaller, in my opinion, is exactly the same build for Soul Harvester. Again, I do think you might be able to drop Cold a Week and pick up Sacrolash, specifically because Dark Harvest and single target doesn't have as much value as it does in AoE. That's definitely something that I'll keep an eye on. Same with Sudden Onset. More Agony damage and things like that might be better than just having more frequent Dark Harvest, but it's something that I keep playing around with. As of right now, I'm just suggesting just run the exact same single target build as Soul Harvester if you're in pure single target. There might be some differences for cleave fights and things like that, especially if there's ever two targets that you can hit, whether you're playing Soul Harvester or Hellcaller, you're going to go, and two targets at the same time, not spread out, and you can hit them both with Seed, you're going to go for your Seed stuff. Like, this is just way more impactful than UA is, especially with our new tier set. But that about covers it for talents for Hellcaller. Again, I'll have everything up to date as much as I can in the Discord whenever anything changes. For Hellcaller single target rotation in Midnight Season 2, nothing has really changed in my opinion in how you actually do your rotation, other than if you're running Cascading Calamity and Malefic Grasp, which most of the time in pure single target you will be. I'm going to do the first part of this in the Mythic Plus build, and then I'll do a raid version, like raid single target version after this, where I am running both of those. The other thing that I do want to mention, I mentioned this in the Soul Harvester section earlier too, is this specific trinket. So if you are running this channeled haste trinket, it's going to change a little bit in where you use that in your rotation. Essentially, you're going to use that before you Dark Harvest. So I approach Hellcaller the same way I kind of approach Soul Harvester in terms of like where you align your Dark Harvest and stuff like that, except you don't have to burn shards out. So as I'm going into the pool, I set a focus target on that. I'm going to do Haunt first, and then Agony, and then Wither. And if I was using that Haunt one or that other trinket, I would use that. And then I'm going to Dark Harvest here. And then I'm going to Trinket Potion, Malevolence, Dark Glare. And then I'm just going to be ripping UAs onto this thing, right? And then in between, I'm going to make sure I'm maintaining Wither and I'm maintaining Agony. So I'll weave in that Nightfall proc, maintain this Agony, refresh this Haunt, dumping UAs. I don't like to burn out all of my UAs unless, you know, I absolutely am in Wither or in Malevolence, and then it's okay, you can burn most of them out, but I like to always have at least one UA or one shard so I can maintain a UA at all times on there. And then I'm just weaving in Shadow Bolts and refreshing our dots, right? Maintaining a UA at all times, refresh this Agony. If we got a Malevolence proc, then I'm just sending as many shards as I can. If I'm not in a Malevolence proc, or I don't have Malevolence, I'm kind of reserving shards. I'll always maintain a UA at all times. Like we'll have one out there, I'll send this Dark Harvest. Refresh that Wither, refresh this Agony, refresh this Haunt, and then maintain that UA. And then I don't have a Malevolence right now, so I'm saving these shards right here, right? I'm just filling with this. If we got a Malevolence proc, rip these shards, right? Rip these UAs out there as much as you can. Boom, boom, boom. And that's basically the whole rotation in single target for the most part. Don't worry too much about syncing up Dark Harvest and Dark Glare. You don't really need to worry about that. But syncing up Malevolence and Dark Glare, super important, right? So that just came back up, sending it. Those two should always be synced together. It's a 1 minute and 2 minute, right? So other than that, don't worry too much about syncing up Dark Harvest and Dark Glare. It's not as impactful in my opinion. You can just kind of let that thing rip. Don't Dark Harvest in Malevolence if you can help it. Dark Harvest and then Malevolence. So I briefly mentioned it, but for Hellcaller in Raid Pure Single Target, you are running, obviously, Cascading Calamity and Malefic Grasp, and I'm assuming you're going to run that Haste Trinket, which I believe is also best for Hellcaller. And it changes things a little bit, but essentially your core functionality is going to stay the same. Like, you want to spend as many shards as you can in Malevolence and conserve them outside of Malevolence. And then you don't worry as much about syncing Dark Harvest with Dark Glare. You worry mainly about syncing Malevolence with Dark Glare. That's like your most important thing. So similar to Soul Harvester, I'm going to go into the pool. I'm going to set my focus target. And then as we're going in, I'm going to send Haunted, and then Agony, and then Wither. And then I'm immediately going to hit this Haste Trinket, Dark Harvest, Potion, Malevolence, and then Glare, and then I'm dumping UAs, right? We're not running Siphon Life, so I'm not worried about maintaining Wither, and then I'm just filling in with as many grasp as I can, catch that Agony, refresh that Haunt, and then I'm just, as many Malefic Grasp as we can get in this window, the better, without letting anything fall, right? If we get a proc, send it. In Malevolence, I'm dumping basically all of my shards. I'm not as worried about running out of them, because you usually get some procs, especially when we're just spamming Grasp like this. You can usually get one extra one there, and then I'm just refreshing Agony, refreshing Wither, filling with Drains, always maintaining one UA at all times and making sure that I retain this haste buff, right? By refreshing a UA on top of this previous UA. When Dark Harvest comes back off cooldown, refresh the Agony, send it. We're not getting any shards off it, so you don't have to worry about burning out shards. Refresh that UA. I'm going to probably dump a couple down here so we stay at like 3 stacks, right? And then we don't overcap on shards. Ideally, you would probably just maintain one here and make sure you don't overcap on shards until you get to Malevolence back, or if you get a proc of Malevolence, right? I'm about to get Malevolence back. Get this, send this UA, refresh this Haunt, and then I'm just dumping UAs in this window again, right? And then just filling with Drains. That, for the most part, is the main. That's basically how you do it. Make sure you're maintaining this guy. Make sure you at least have a UA at all times, and then sync your Malevolence with your Dark Glare. Try and conserve shards outside of Malevolence window if you can, but don't ever let a UA fall. That's pretty much it. Hellcaller's AoE rotation in Midnight Season 2 is definitely a little different because of the removal of Nocturnal Yield, just like Soul Harvester. So you're still doing the same thing where you're weaving in my opinion, with Nightfalls with Shadow Bolts over Drains, especially because you don't have as many interactions with them. So in my opinion, it's much more important to be casting things like Seed and UA inside of Malevolence than it is to be casting these guys. But because of the way that Malevolence, or the way that Hellcaller generates resources, you're probably going to be doing a lot of filler. I think Shadow Bolt's just better for movement and getting more value out of your Nightfall procs, but Drain is perfectly fine if you want that, especially to try and help our single target damage as Hellcaller. So essentially though, as you're going into a pull, I will always set a focus target. I will usually set on a priority mob, like I mentioned in Soul Harvester. It's one, if you're using my nameplates, it's always going to be marked green. It's like an important caster or a scary mob in that pack. And then as our tank is going into the pool, I'm putting out Agonies, right, as we're gathering until it's gathered up. And then I'm going to send that Haunt in, and then I'm going to send 1 seed. I'm going to Dark Harvest. I'm going to Trinket Potion Malevolence, refresh that Agony, Dark Glare, and then just dump seeds. We don't have to worry about overcapping from Dark Harvest, and then I'm just maintaining Agonies, right? I'm filling it with Nightfalls, retaining Haunt, and then just spamming seeds. You're not so much worried about maintaining a like UA at all times, or worrying about only being in Malevolence windows to spin shards. You are spinning seeds. If there is 2 targets in front of you, you are always spinning seeds. You will definitely bottom out on shards in some situations. In that case, just fill with Nightfall procs or Shadow Bolts, or refresh Agonies. Same rule applies, I think, as the Soul Harvester. I usually like to have between 6 and 8 Agonies at all times. 6 is usually pretty comfortable. 8's a little tricky sometimes. Your more important thing is casting seed, so make sure you're always casting seeds and not just casting, catching too many Agonies. It's a really easy loop to get into. And then my biggest tip too that I'll say is try and refresh Agonies when you have to move, or plan of movement when you do have to refresh an Agony, right? So like if an Agony gets low and I need to refresh this, and I know I kind of need to get ready to move, I'm gonna refresh an Agony when I have to move, and then I'm gonna go back to just planting seed, right? Maintain Malevolence. Malevolence comes up, rip it on cooldown, right? It's a 1-minute cooldown. If things have like 30-ish% health or somewhere around there, I'm sending Malevolence again, right? Unless I know there's a huge pull coming up or we're about to chain or something like that, I'm just sending it. The way that Wither works now, right, you're not going to have a bunch of Wither stacks, so like if a Wither falls, it's not the end of the world like it was before, and we're playing Siphon Life, but if a Wither falls that has a bunch of stacks on it, it is important. So as you're spamming seeds, you don't ever have to worry about Withers, right? We're just maintaining Agonies, and we're just weaving in Nightfall procs and seeds. That's pretty much it. Be active about using your cooldowns on cooldown. Keep Malevolence and Dark Glare synced as much as you can. And that's pretty much it. Lastly, I do want to touch on my user interface and add-ons that I use. I talk about this in every single one of my guides because I think it's something that's often overlooked, but is super impactful for Affliction. And that's why I have all of my interface stuff completely free in my Discord. And this season, I'm happy to announce that I have my own profile loader. So you can just download this from the Discord. It's going to install all of my custom icons for you, which if you didn't know, I have custom icons for both Affliction and Demo, and I'll be having some Destro ones coming really soon. This will set all that stuff easily up for you. And then I'll be updating everything through this, as well as having each individual import on my Discord. If you would rather just use that, totally fine. But this will walk you through the steps of getting everything set up super fast and very easily, and you don't really have to worry about anything like that. We've been working pretty hard on this, and I'm very thankful for that Glowy put all the time in them. Thanks, Glowy, for that. But essentially, I just want to talk about your interface is really important for Affliction, because more often than not, you're tracking dots on your nameplates. That's the way I like to track dots anyways. I'm not always looking here. I'm glancing down here for my cooldowns, but more often than not, I'm looking at what's going on out here. So I talked about it briefly in like my rotation section, but I always go into my target, like into my pools, having a focus target. So I think having just clear, clean information is super important, and reducing a lot of clutter and visual clutter off your screen is always kind of, impactful, especially for Mythic Plus and especially for Affliction, where you're kind of just dealing with a lot of information. So just kind of cleaning all that up so you can just see the stuff that you need to see, like what dots you have out there, what your cooldowns are at, all that information, super important. Again, you don't have to use my UI, that's totally fine. All I'm trying to just spread is take the time to set your UI up and make yourself prepared for those situations so you don't go out there and you have no idea what's going on. Just set the target dummies, mess around with stuff, adjust things. I currently use Ellesmere UI for most of my stuff. I would highly suggest that. And then again, you can grab my profiles for whatever you want and then set up stuff for yourself. It's all good. Everything's free in my Discord. I'll never charge for any of that stuff. The major thing that I just want to say is trying to reduce things you don't need to see on your screen, I would say, is important. I hide all of my keybinds and what stuff I have just because I don't need to see it. It's totally fine if you still need to see keybinds for things, or you just need to see your regular stuff. It's all good. But I think if you slowly reduce the visual clutter off your screen and you only have, important information, really good. The other thing I want to just briefly touch on, take the time to mess with your keybinds. Affliction get a little scary sometimes because you're trying to manage all those dots and you're doing all those normal things, right? So while you are kind of just spamming seed in some situations, I would say taking the time to get your keybind set up and your UI set up, definitely worth the time and the investment. Everybody's keybinds are unique to them, but I definitely think that it's something that I don't see mentioned in guides very often, and I want to just say, take the time to set that up. Have a keybind for setting your focus target. Don't be afraid to just dig into keybinds in general. I don't use a lot of macros, but One macro that I will suggest that I have now that I didn't use before is a mouse over agony macro. I'll put this in the description of this video. Essentially, it just allows you to mouse over instead of having to target that. Because we have usually a focus target that we're kind of branching off of, you might have a cluster of a bunch of mobs, and being able to just stay on this guy and then, you know, refresh agonies on other ones without having to change target. Super helpful. I didn't used to play with a mouse over agony at all, but this season I'm definitely switching over to it. I think it's super helpful. As far as other macro stuff, that's all you. And then for other add-ons that I would suggest using this season, other than the profile loader, Northern Sky Raid Tools is essentially what Weak Auras was to some extent. There's a lot of functionality that's coming in this with a lot of like building auras and things like that that work very similar to how Weak Auras worked. Highly recommend that. Most guilds will probably require you to have this anyways. Big wigs I use for like boss timers and things like that. Again, all my profiles for that are available through the profile loader. And then Talent Loader EX allows you to import all of my talents. But essentially, most add-ons are gone now. And I would say that Ellesmere UI replaces like 99% of my add-ons, and I just use that for all of my UI stuff. And then, like I mentioned, Northern Sky Raid Tools. That's pretty much it. Simcraft if you want to sim yourself. But Northern Sky Raid Tools is probably going to be the most beneficial one for Mythic Plus and for Raid because it just gives you a lot of auras and stuff like that. I'll be building more things out for that, and I'll share all those things with you. They'll all be in the loader and imports in there, but as of right now, don't have anything to share on that. But I did want to quickly talk on add-ons, setting up your UI, keybinds, all that kind of stuff, just because I feel like it's often overlooked. All right, guys, I think that about wraps it up. I tried to cover everything that I could in this guide. I know that season 2 is going to be a little tricky with gear and optimization, stuff like that, so I would definitely say if you want to stay up to date with all that stuff, come by the stream, be sure to subscribe to the YouTube. I will be making a ton of Affliction content this season as always. I tried to also include a little bit more raid information in this guide, specifically with like the single target rotation, stuff like that. I might try and upload more boss kill videos this year. I said I'd do that last year as well, and I ended up not really doing it as much, but this year I'm going to try and make that a little bit more of a priority for everybody that does like that kind of content. I have been writing a lot more though, so with that said, I hope this helped, man. As always, I put a ton of time and effort into this guide, so I really hope it helps you. I love making these things. I love Affliction. I was genuinely worried about Affliction going into season 2. Season 1's playstyle was definitely getting a little boring to me, in my opinion, where we were just kind of spamming seed all the time. At least now, with the way that our AoE rotation works and the way we feel in Mythic Plus, you're kind of still interacting with your kit a little bit more, with maintaining a little more agonies, weaving in shadow bolts again, especially in single target with maintaining corruption again. I personally just feel like that feels a lot more impactful to me, where you're playing around your dots. Just spamming seed the entire time with Nightfall procs and not really caring about agonies or anything like that, in my opinion, was getting pretty boring. So I'm really happy with the changes that Affliction has right now. I definitely think that our single target damage is still lacking at the time of me making this video, but I'm hoping for some buffs. We'll see how we feel in Raid. I've heard that some of the fights are pretty good for us. For the most part, I'm extremely excited for Season 2. I think Affliction looks really fun. I've been having a great time. Destro looks pretty fun too. I don't care about Demo ever, so. But Destro I'll be playing a lot more of, and Affl will be playing a lot more of. I've been having a great time on the PTR, and I'm very excited for Season 2. Hopefully this guide helped you out. If you have more questions, feel free to leave a comment, join the Discord, ask questions, come by the stream, twitch.tv/Arson. I am always happy to help anybody. I'm also offering coaching and stuff like that this season too, so feel free to reach out to me on Discord or ping me on Discord and stuff like that. I'm trying to set up something and figure some stuff out. I'm always happy to help people learn Affliction, man, any way that I possibly can. The other thing is, I did release my full UI profile loader. I mentioned it briefly. It's something that I'm extremely excited about and super proud of. So if you want to use my UI, it's a really easy way to get all set up. Everything is still available as like profiles and stuff in the Discord if you want to install all that stuff individually. Totally fine. And I have a full new Season 2 merch drop available on broomnow.com. Be sure to check that out. I put a ton of time into all those designs that were all made by me. I love them. I think they turned out fantastic. I'm extremely excited for you guys to see them. So I think that about wraps everything up. Thank you guys so much for watching. I appreciate it. None of this would be possible without you. I'm so happy to be here. I'm so happy to have Affliction content to be making, and I hope that you enjoy, and I look forward to Affliction in Season 2. Stay tuned for more stuff. I'll see you guys in the next one. Thanks so much for watching.